They were closing the coffin when she leaned over my shoulder and whispered, with that cold reserve that only women acquire when they are confident of their victory, "You have a week to leave." Her voice was rustling like the wind through dry leaves, and nothing in the intonation betrayed either grief, sympathy, or even simple human concern. It was an order, not a request, and it was said so quietly that no one around me heard it. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. The funeral program, printed on thick white paper with charcoal black edging and Gothic script, was still lying in my lap, unnaturally light and at the same time like a stone. My fingers involuntarily closed around its edge, and as if that could distract me from what I had said, I squeezed it with such force that the corner cracked with a crunch. I didn't turn around. I didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing my reaction. I just sat there, frozen like a marble statue on a cemetery fence, looking ahead to where the priest was still talking about peace, completion, and how souls find peace when bodies sink into the ground. But there was no peace inside me. My son Leon no longer existed in this world. 3 years is not the age for death, it is not even the middle of life, it is only the beginning of its understanding. A heart attack, sudden as a bolt from the blue, like a lightning strike that shattered the only lamp in a dark room. Leon was the only person in the world who really knew me, who never allowed me to feel like a stranger in this world. And now he was lying there, motionless, silent, in a velvet-covered coffin, next to which his wife Emma was wearing a black dress, probably made long before the tragedy, and shedding tears in which there was more theater than pain, and her lips, trembling and pursed, were no longer uttering words of prayer, and the calculations. She said it, that you have a week, with such gentleness, as if she was comforting me, as if she was taking care of me, like a hospice nurse, and then she squeezed my shoulder very gently. The touch was almost maternal, and that's why it was especially disgusting. I didn't move. It was as if everything inside me froze, turned to stone, turned into a void that no one else would look into. Her words were like poison slowly spreading through my veins, but I didn't let a single muscle on my face twitch. She left to greet someone new, and a voice shadow behind me whispered, "She's so strong." Yes, of course. Strong. She still has a home, status, youth, energy. Losing a husband is a tragedy, but losing a son is a disaster that has no words or rituals to describe it. I wanted to laugh. Hoarse, angry, hysterical. But my chest just burned, not from crying, but from the inability to express them. I was silent. She was silent while the service was going on, while the last prayer was being said, while people in their black suits and formal dresses began to disperse towards the reception hall, to where canapes and coffee were already being prepared, to where they would start talking about consolation and inheritance in the air. When it was time to leave, Emma took her grandmother's arm with demonstrative care and helped her walk to the car. I was left standing alone, as if I were transparent. We were in Leon's car. Silently. I'm in the passenger seat, she's driving. She didn't say a word, and that silence seemed louder to me than a scream. The salon still smelled of his cologne, sandalwood and bergamot, the fragrance he always used, and which I myself once gave him. The smell could have torn me apart, could have broken me, but I was too busy trying to figure out what game she was playing. In the house, she opened the doors to everyone who came to express their condolences, and, like an actress at a premiere, she delivered a speech about Leon's strength of spirit, his inexhaustible sense of humor, and his love for his family, so convincingly that silence filled the room, filled with false reverence. I stood behind the kitchen island, off to the side, not participating, not interfering, like an outcast at my own funeral. She poured wine, made toasts, hugged people, and all this with that impeccable grace that widows show on screens, but never in their lives. But I noticed little things. The family photo that always hung by the stairs was gone. The metal case with Leon's Army awards has been removed. The footprints were fresh, too hasty. She's already scrubbed it off. I did the laundry. When it was over and the house was empty again, I went to my room, the one I'd lived in for the last 7 years, where every morning started with the smell of coffee and every evening ended in silence. The door was ajar. My blanket is neatly folded. The lamp is turned off and disconnected from the mains. Dresser. Half of the drawers were empty. The jewelry box was gone. There were boxes with stickers in the closet, Mom's things. I stood for a minute, like a person who finds himself in someone else's apartment, similar to his own. I walked past the kitchen. Emma was sitting at the dining table with a glass of wine and a phone in her hand, her shoulders relaxed, her posture impeccable, like a woman who controls everything that happens, even when everyone else believes she's just going through a tragedy. She didn't look up, didn't show the slightest sign that she felt my presence, as if I were air, a light draft that had accidentally passed through the room. I cleared my throat, partly to get her attention, partly because my voice was stuck in my throat like a dusty bone. "Have you moved my things?" I asked, barely keeping my voice calm, knowing that every word could be used against me like sandpaper, slowly erasing my right to be. Finally, she looked at me, slowly, as if it were a borrowed gesture, and said with a tight smile, as if she were handing out charity rations, "I was just organizing. There's a moving company I can call when you're ready." She smiled as if she was offering me tea instead of kicking me out of the house. I asked the next question, my voice trembling a little, "Where are my jewels?" She replied without batting an eye, "Some of them are in the safe." "You don't want to lose anything while people are coming in and out." "I never asked you to touch my things," I said, and my heart was pounding, not so much from her words as from their indifference. She sipped her wine, as if my protest was a minor noise, like a dog barking outside the window. "Leon and I talked about it. It's not personal. We just assumed that you would want to return to your sisters." "I don't have a sister," I said, peering at her, hoping that at least it would make her look away, but she just shrugged. "It was his house. He would like us to have a place for mourning," she said, and in these words there was no warmth or respect for my son's memory, only calculation, covered with a ritual phrase. Then she picked up the phone, returning to the correspondence, as if I had disappeared, as if my pain and my existence were just an inconvenient decoration. I went out before I said anything that I would regret later. I went back to my room and checked the drawers again, this time slowly, methodically, trying to stay calm, as if it were an ordinary day, an ordinary inspection. The box I kept under my bed is gone. I opened the closet and saw a basket labeled Old Docs. I pulled it out, rummaged inside, receipts, old mail, warranty cards from equipment that has been gone for a long time. Then I found a folder, a dark blue one with a bent corner. It contained old medical records, bank documents, and my passport. My heart started pounding when I realized what wasn't there. I kept digging, as if the very possibility of finding what I'd lost could undo what was happening. But there was no bill of sale. The one with my name on it, the one that Leon insisted on keeping when we made the purchase together, and I helped make the initial payment after he was out of work. It's not just paper, it's my right. I checked twice. Emma's voice came from the hallway, lightheartedly, as if we were discussing the dinner menu. "Hey, do you want the leftover salad or should I throw it away?" I didn't answer. My hand was shaking. The document has disappeared. The next morning, the kitchen was empty, and the smell of coffee that used to wake me up in the morning had already worn off. When I entered, Emma was sitting at her desk, typing on her laptop, focused and silent, as if nothing had happened. She looked up. "Good morning." "I'm just checking offers from movers." I opened the refrigerator. My containers, simple plastic jars with signatures in marker, are gone. They were replaced by others, alien, sterile ones. I said, "I didn't order movers." She smiled without looking up. "But you said you wanted to settle things according to your schedule." I thought it would help. She took a sip from her mug and tapped something on the keyboard. I went into the living room. Leon's chair, his favorite, worn, with a dent from the body, was gone. Instead, there was a smooth fake, shiny as a lie. His blanket, gray, knitted, with traces of time, was rolled up and tucked under the bedside table like a rag. "Where's Leon's chair?" I asked. It was old. "It didn't fit into the room anymore," she said and shrugged, as if it wasn't a memory, but trash. I stared at her. A week has passed. 9 days have passed. She had already started living without him. "I'm not going to sit in a dead man's chair, Clara," she said, pronouncing my name for the first time, as if it were someone else's, as an offensive nickname. I turned around and went outside. I had to breathe. I sat down on the steps, took out my phone, and called the lawyer Leon had recommended to me. The secretary answered quickly and, to my relief, said they would be able to see me this afternoon. I didn't tell Emma where I was going. I just left. Mr. Holt, a burly man with attentive eyes, immediately remembered Leon. "Reliable guy," he said. "I'm sorry." I told him everything, how Emma demands that I leave, how my name was on the deed, and how this document disappeared. He asked me how long I had been living in this house. I replied, 7 years, from the very beginning, since the house was bought. He clarified, "Is there any written confirmation that you have made an initial payment?" I said I used a cash receipt. "And I still have it." His eyes flashed, not with joy, but with opportunity. "Then maybe we can do something," he said. I asked him to explain. He said that if my name was on the deed and I had documentary evidence that I had paid part of the amount for the initial payment, if I had indeed lived in the house on a permanent basis all these years, and especially if I had the original papers, then by law she had no right to demand my eviction, as no matter how loudly and convincingly she talks about it. He spoke calmly, confidently, with that slight hint of weariness that only lawyers who are too familiar with human tricks betray. He told me to find the cashier's check, preferably the original, not a copy, and, if possible, all the papers related to the purchase of the house, especially those with my name as the co-owner or at least as the person involved in the payment. I thanked him and drove home, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my joints turned white and my nails dug into the skin of my palms. It was as if I was holding not the car, but control over myself, trying not to let rage or fear get the better of me. When I returned, Emma was pacing the hallway, holding her phone to her ear and staring out the window. I entered quietly, but I heard, "No, she doesn't know anything," and her voice dropped sharply when she noticed me out of the corner of her eye. "It's all settled." These words hung in the air like an ominous pollen. I didn't answer, didn't stop, didn't engage in conversation. I just walked past her like a ghost and went straight to the attic, to the part of the house where the boxes were stored, forgotten by time. Leon always treated the paper side of life scrupulously, and after their wedding, he carefully put all important documents in boxes, signing them in a neat, slightly slanted handwriting. I went upstairs feeling my heart racing, as if I was afraid I might not find what I was looking for, or worse, I might find too much. The attic greeted me with dense dust, the smell of wood and time. I opened box after box, school diplomas, tax returns, moving records, letters from friends. Then I saw it, a gray box labeled "Buying a House." My breath caught in my throat. I pulled it out, sat down on the floor, among the cobwebs and old fabrics, and began flipping through the contents: insurance contracts, copies of correspondence with the bank, drafts of applications. And here it is, a thick envelope made of cream paper with a handwritten inscription, "Closing the deal." I opened it with trembling fingers, like opening a wound, afraid that it would be empty. But it wasn't empty. I stared at the document. My name. My full name, inked next to his. My signature. His signature. Date. Notarization. The registration stamp. Everything is in place. It wasn't just an act, it was a defense. I sat for a few seconds, letting the realization slowly soak into my mind, like rain soaking into dry earth. Emma was bluffing. Either she really didn't know that I had a legal right to a part of the house, or, more likely, she knew and hoped that I wouldn't remember, wouldn't find, wouldn't dare. I put the documents in my coat pocket, carefully closed the box, and when I went down the stairs, I saw her standing at the bottom, as if waiting. "Are you looking for something?" "What is it?" she asked, raising an eyebrow with the same mockery with which women greet other women on the verge of defeat. I looked her straight in the eye. "Just old documents. Nothing important." Her face twitched for a moment, then immediately returned to its flawless shape. "That's good," she said, smiling. "I wouldn't want you to be nervous. Then she turned and walked into the kitchen, as if there hadn't been a silent battle between us in which one of us had won the first victory. That evening, I scanned the documents, made copies, sent them to my email, and created a separate folder called Lawyers Only. I wasn't stupid. I knew that the game would be dirty, and that if I didn't hedge in from all sides, it could all disappear as suddenly as it appeared. She thought she had the power, but now I have the advantage. I just had to move carefully. Around 9 o'clock in the evening, she came into the living room with 2 glasses of wine in her hands and said emphatically, "I thought we should have a straight talk." I took the glass, but I didn't take a sip. "Okay," I replied. She sat cross-legged across from me and turned slightly sideways, as if demonstrating invulnerability. I know the situation was tense, but Leon always said that this house was for us, for our future family. I didn't say anything, just watched the reflection of the glass on her fingers. She looked down at her glass. "I don't want things to get bad. I just want to move forward." I looked down at her hand. His wedding ring was still on the ring finger of his left hand. This ring no longer looked like a memory, but like a trophy. She looked up. "You understand, don't you?" I asked, "Have you talked to a lawyer?" Her face twitched, and her lips tightened for a moment. "No, I didn't think it was necessary." I smiled. "Maybe it is." She narrowed her eyes. "Are you threatening me, Clara?" I smiled again. "No. Just thinking out loud." She stood up slowly. "I hope we can do this in a simple way." I nodded. "Me too." She left, holding a glass in her hand, and I was left alone. I waited until the sound of her footsteps disappeared through the door, then took out my phone and checked the scan again. My name was clear as day, like the truth that cannot be erased. The next morning, I printed out 2 copies of the document and put them in an envelope marked for Mr. Holt. I didn't call. I just went to the office, handed it over to my assistant, saying it was urgent, and left without waiting for questions. When I got home, I saw Emma digging in the garage, her movements fast and confident, as if she had not only freed herself from grief, but had long ago rejected it as an outdated outfit. She looked up, noticing my car, and, waving her hand, said with strained nonchalance, which sounded almost bored, "Hi. I'm just getting rid of the junk. I hope it's okay." I nodded, without saying a word, and walked past her, pretending not to notice the disappearance of Leon's fishing gear, the very ones he kept with the childish reverence with which a boy protects his first trophies. I went up to my room, hoping to find at least some privacy, but when I opened the top drawer of the bedside table, I suddenly discovered that it was locked, although in all the 7 years that I had lived here, it had never had a lock or even a hint of closure. I took an old flat-head screwdriver out of a drawer in the pantry, easily pushed the edge, and the lock gave way. Inside, I discovered that my small bottle of prescription medications, the ones I took for my arrhythmia, was missing, and my envelope with money that I kept for emergencies was gone. She was sending a message, subtle, predatory, almost graceful in its meanness. I have no privacy left, no space, not even hiding places. I sat on the bed with my fists clenched, breathing through my teeth, trying not to let the flames of rage that were slowly igniting inside my chest turn into a fire. When my breathing became more regular, I did something I hadn't dared to do since the day Leon died. I entered his office and went to the gray metal filing cabinet that he always locked, but where now, after his death, the lock had been removed. In the third drawer, I found a folder neatly signed in his handwriting, "Refinancing Options." I opened it, and flipping through the neat papers, I saw new mortgage statements dated less than a year ago. They had our names on them, mine and Leona's, and not a single line about Emma. Even after the refinancing, her name never appeared on the documents. It mattered, it was proof, weighty, indisputable. I took a picture from my phone and immediately saved it in the cloud, and then in a separate secure folder. I heard her voice in the hallway, and she was talking on the speakerphone again, as if she'd forgotten she wasn't alone in the house. "Yes, she's still here," Emma said, her voice irritably soft, like someone tired of explaining. "I know it's awkward, but she doesn't have any real rights." Pause. "No, Her name is not in the current bills for utilities or taxes. Everything will be fine. I went out into the hallway, making enough noise to make it clear that I could hear. She turned around abruptly, her eyes widening for a moment. Is everything okay? What is it? She asked, feigning concern. You really should be careful what you say in this house. The walls are thin, I replied coldly, passing by and heading for the kitchen. I turned on the stove, took out the turkey, and started making coffee, as if it were an ordinary morning, as if her words weren't an attempt to erase me from this reality. She stayed in the shadows for the rest of the day, and it wasn't until evening, as I walked past the living room, that I noticed that on the wall where our family portrait used to hang, Leon, me, and even Emma, with an artificial but still sincere smile, there was now a faceless painting of a landscape. Blue mountains, frozen lake, empty snow. Not a single person. I've been staring at this new symbol for so long that I forgot why I stopped. That evening, she ordered Chinese food. She didn't even put my dish on a plate, leaving it in a paper bag on the kitchen counter, without a note, without politeness, without the desire to preserve the illusion of normality. I took the food, closed the door behind me, and inserted the wedge under the jam, the one I had saved a week ago when I felt that the night might become dangerous. I didn't want to take any more chances. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, I woke up to the sound of footsteps, slow, measured, almost theatrical, outside my door. I got up, walked over, and put my ear to the tree. There was no knocking or rustling. Only silence, then retreating footsteps. In the morning, the alarm clock was flashing at 12:01 a.m. The electricity went out for exactly 1 minute. I checked the dashboard. All the circuit breakers were in order. An accident? No. Too precise, too precise. She was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee. When I entered, she looked up, as if we were just neighbors. Coffee? She suggested. I refused. I didn't need her sugar anymore. Later, I went back to Mr. Holt. This time I sat down across from him, laid out the photos, the refinancing, and copies of the deed in front of him. He looked through them carefully, thoughtfully, like a surgeon before an operation. She has no legal basis, he said finally. Your name is on all the main documents. She is not mentioned anywhere. You have been living here for more than 7 years, and you participated in the financial support of the house. If she tries to evict you, she will lose. I asked if I could submit a preventive application. He nodded, and his tone became businesslike, collected. We will file a notice of joint ownership, as well as prepare an official legal response to any claims if she decides to do something. You asked about the risk. It is minimal, only if you lose your documents. Take care of them and stay calm. I drove home not with relief, not with triumph, but with a new silence in my chest, heavy, determined, like the calm before the storm. It wasn't grief, it wasn't fear, it was the concentrated knowledge that the battle was still ahead, but now I was armed. When I entered, Emma was sitting on the couch, neatly folding clean linen, folded towels, pillowcases, t-shirts, as if every movement was supposed to symbolize order, as if after Leon's death she had decided to make the house look perfect, erase all signs of someone else's presence, shade my existence in this space with household routine. She looked up, her gaze skimming over my face like a showcase in which she was looking for a reflection of her own confidence. Did you go somewhere? What is it? She asked casually, as if she really didn't care. I just needed some fresh air, I replied, letting my voice remain soft, like a glove stretched over acute irritation. She raised an eyebrow, and there was something in her expression that could have been surprise, or it could have been hidden annoyance. You suddenly look confident. I smiled, almost warmly, and said, I just remembered something important. For a moment, her hands froze over a stack of white towels, her gaze dimmed, as if an internal calculator had turned on in her head, quickly sorting through possible scenarios. Well, I hope this doesn't complicate the situation, she said, averting her eyes. I opened the refrigerator, and the first thing that caught my eye was my labeled food, neatly arranged on the shelves. The same containers. It's the same as my handwriting. There was something almost demonstrative about this gesture, an attempt to lull my vigilance, a sudden rollback after a lot of hidden attacks. That night, when I was almost dozing off, I heard her voice through the barely opened door. She was on the phone again, sitting in the guest room. Yes, she's acting weird. I may have to move down the timeline, she said, as if she were planning to turn over the facility. Pause. If she finds this file, we're finished. I didn't need to listen any further. She didn't know what I had already found. She didn't know that the lawyer already had the documents, that the process had been launched, and now her pretense was only delaying the inevitable. But those words, they were a clue. There was more to it all than an inheritance dispute. Something hidden. And I was determined to get to the bottom of it. 3 days later, as if nothing alarming had happened, Emma, with that serene look that could only suit a wedding planner, announced over a cup of morning coffee that she would organize a small funeral meeting for Leon's friends and colleagues. She said this without meeting my eyes, pouring almond milk into her mug, and ignored the mug I placed next to her. Just a little closure, she added, as if it wasn't about saying goodbye, but about a social reception. The preparation went on without me. No requests, not even suggestions, just a passing remark that I should keep the guest bathroom clean and not talk too much, especially on personal topics, if I start a conversation with one of the guests. I didn't mind, just watched. I watched her pull out Leon's old bar cart, the one he once made himself, and fill it with bottles, as if she were hosting a cocktail party. I saw her laying out mini snacks, imported crackers, neat piles of cheeses, as if all this was not morning, but a new beginning, her beginning. The first guest was Kyle, Leon's friend from work. He hugged me tightly and said softly in my ear, "He talked about you all the time. He said you were the only person he could always rely on." I held back my tears, nodded, and thanked him. Then others started coming. Neighbors. Colleagues. A few women I didn't know were Emma's friends from the Pilates studio. I smiled, answered the words on duty, and kept silent about how Leon's books had disappeared, how his chair had been taken out, and how his world had been neatly, methodically dismantled. At some point, an unknown woman came up to me and, slightly bowing her head, asked sympathetically, "How are you holding up?" I answered simply, "As much as possible, considering that I still live here." She frowned, apparently not understanding what I meant. I added, "Leon and I were co-owners of the house. Emma's taking care of everything now, but I'm still here." Her eyebrows rose in surprise. "Oh," she said, "I thought she said it was her house." I nodded. A simple mistake. An hour passed. I noticed Emma watching me from across the room, her lips curved in a familiar social smile, but her eyes betrayed her. There was no calm in them, only tension, assessment, suspicion. When the people started to leave, she came up to me, again politely, again flawlessly. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" I followed her into the hallway. She closed the door behind us. "Are you trying to start something?" "What is it?" she asked, her voice low but with a metallic echo. I answered the question honestly. I replied and crossed my arms over my chest. For the first time I stopped pretending. "Don't play nice, Clara. These people don't need to hear about paperwork," she said, coming closer, her breath almost touching my face. I didn't move. "It's a delicate matter," she continued, more restrained now. "These people took care of Leon. They are here to support me." I replied calmly, "Then maybe you shouldn't have a wine party in a house from which you're wiping away his traces." Her face flushed. "If you don't like being here, you can leave." I smiled. "Oh, I'm not going anywhere." She leaned closer, whispering, almost without touching the air, "You think you're smart, Clara, but you don't know how it works. I'll make sure you regret staying." Then she came out into the living room with the same polite expression on her face, with that strained mask of secular friendliness that seemed to have no cracks, and, without flinching, neither with her voice nor with her eyes, greeted the next guest, as if a few minutes before we were not standing in the hallway, whispering threats to each other, poisoned by lies and self-righteousness. I spent the rest of the evening in silence, not engaging in conversations, not succumbing to her demonstrative lightness, just watching the faces, listening to snatches of dialogue, watching how carefully she plays the role of hostess, widow, victim. I noticed a man who appeared among the guests closer to 8, about 40, with a close, shaven head, wearing an elegant coat the color of wet asphalt, which fitted him like a cast. He didn't eat or drink, just moved slowly around the room, stopping at the bookshelves, looking at the photo frames, and several times glanced at me, not insistently, not hostile, but studying, as if he was looking for a clue in my features. I caught his eyes and didn't look away. He approached Emma, exchanged a few words with her in the hallway, and then suddenly left without even saying goodbye to me or the others, as if his presence here was needed only for a few moments. His movement was measured, his steps were almost noiseless, and the way he disappeared remained with me, like a taste of something disturbing and unfinished. When the guests had left, Emma silently cleaned up the leftovers, put the empty glasses in the dishwasher, and wiped the countertops. I didn't offer to help, and she didn't expect it. We were like two people who happened to be in the same scene of someone else's play, each with his own line, but not speaking the same language for a long time. Closer to midnight, passing by the guest room, I noticed that her bag, which was always zipped up, was now open, and a yellow manila folder, which had definitely not been there before, was sticking out of it. I went back to my room, picked up my phone, went to Emma's door and, without inhaling, took a photo through the crack. On the folder was written the title, clearly written in marker, "Document Copies." A backup plan. I waited until she went to take a shower, and when the water started running, I went out into the hallway, tiptoed to her room and carefully parted the edges of the bag. Inside were several other folders, one marked Home Timeline, the other Signatures 2024. I didn't take the documents, didn't touch them, didn't take them out, just carefully, without a flash, photographed the contents. One of the files contained a screenshot of the will, with an electronic signature that I didn't recognize, but the date in the lower corner was treacherously clear, filed on March 4th. Leon died on February 2nd. He couldn't sign anything a month after his death. I stood there with my breathing frozen, my heart thundering so loudly that it seemed to me that it was giving me away. When the water turned off, I quickly closed my bag, returned to my room and froze in silence, listening to her walk down the hall, wrapped in a bathrobe, humming. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from the rush of something new, sharp as an icy wind. I now had more than just a copy of the deed. I had proof that she was forging documents. I had evidence that she planned to take control not only of the house, but also of Leon's memory, to erase everything that did not fit into her version of the truth. I barely closed my eyes that night, and the next morning I woke up to the sound of muffled sobs coming from the kitchen. It wasn't real sobbing, not the kind that bursts out through the throat when the pain can no longer be contained. It was a sound designed to be heard. I entered the kitchen, and a picture appeared in front of me, as if cut out of a TV series. Emma was standing at the sink, in a soft gray bathrobe, a crumpled paper napkin in her hand, her gaze fixed on the window, as if she was looking for an answer to a question that she did not dare to ask. When she heard footsteps, her shoulders shook slightly, and she turned around with a smile that was too steady, too controlled. She ran her hand under her eyes, theatrically, and said, "I'm sorry. I just feel guilty sometimes." I was about to turn around and leave, but then she did something new. She put her hand on my stomach. It wasn't an overt, theatrical move, but it was so deliberate that I couldn't help but notice. And everything inside me froze. "I didn't want to talk until I was sure," she said softly. "I'm pregnant, Clara." For 5 seconds, I couldn't utter a word, not a sound. We stood in complete silence, and every beat of my heart sounded like a bell. Pregnant. That word crumbled in my head like glass. I knew the dates. I knew Leon's body, I knew our lives. I knew he'd been gone for 10 weeks. And then I asked, "How long?" She answered almost immediately, too quickly, 8, maybe 9 weeks. And everything fell into place. Leon had been dead for 10 weeks. It's not his child. I stared at her, showing neither surprise nor accusation, only holding back the storm that rose in me. Emma came over to the table, took out an ultrasound photo from a drawer, and placed it in front of me like a trump card. I picked up the picture and slowly turned it to the light. There's a name in the corner. Clinic. Date. In black, clear print, 4 weeks ago. I used a donor, she said calmly. Leon and I talked about it. Just in case. He wanted me to have a part of him. And in that second, I realized, with the icy clarity that comes only in moments of absolute certainty, that everything she was saying was a lie, elegantly constructed, carefully calibrated, a lie aimed not only at convincing, but also at rewriting history itself, because Leon, no matter how open he was to in recent years, would never have hidden from me the intention to have a child through a donor, would not have discussed such an important and deep thing with someone else besides me. Because we were not just mother and son, we were those who held on to each other for years when there was no one else. The other one. I looked at her, at that face pulled into a mask of vulnerability, and said nothing, just returned the photo without reacting with a glance or a word, maintaining complete indifference, as if I really didn't care. And then she said, I hope now you understand why stability is so important to me, for the sake of the child, and a subtle tremor appeared in her voice, which she undoubtedly wanted to achieve a certain effect. I realized that all this was a new tactic, a carefully staged theater designed for sympathy, for public opinion, for how she would look in court, a grieving widow, pregnant, defenseless, surrounded by hypocritical hostility from her unstable mother-in-law, a woman who refuses to accept loss and creates an unbearable atmosphere. And I, don't be a fool, nodded slowly, paused, and said in a strangled voice, yes, that makes a difference. Her face softened, as if she had finally exhaled, allowing herself to believe that it had all worked, that her little ultrasound scan and gently placing her hand on her stomach had brought the desired result. But as soon as she left the kitchen, I grabbed my phone, opened the photos I'd taken of her documents, and started comparing dates. The ultrasound scan was dated 4 weeks ago. Forged will, the same week, but 4 days later. An amazing coincidence, built as evidence, as artificially planted evidence. I immediately sent it all to Mr. Holt with a short phrase, we need to talk. An hour later, he called back. His voice was calm, but there was a hint of animation in it. It's just as well, he said. If she claims to be emotionally unstable, we can officially request medical records and identify discrepancies in dates, inconsistencies in documents, and determine the sequence of actions. I asked, what if it's all fake? He didn't hesitate, then it's a scam. If you continue to document calmly, without sudden movements, we can win even before the case goes to court. She wants me to snap, I said, and the words sounded almost like a confession. Then don't, he replied. The most powerful weapon is your silence and documents. I hung up the phone and returned to the house with a new silence inside, no longer held back by fear or pain. I cleaned the bathroom, folded the laundry, and dusted the bookshelves, as I had done before. I smiled when Emma threw phrases in my direction like, this child will need so much space or it will be difficult to raise a baby in such an atmosphere. She was watching my reaction, as if weighing when the moment would come when I couldn't stand it. But I held on. I was silent. I nodded. And so it was until Friday, when an envelope in a cardboard folder with a note was quietly placed under the door in the hallway. Urgent, 48 hours. Inside is a printed document, not certified, without the judge's signature, but written in a language designed to scare. It said that I had exactly 48 hours to vacate the premises due to my emotional instability and personal threats directed at a pregnant woman living in the house. I sat holding these pages in my hands and felt my heart pounding, not with fear, but with rage at how sloppily, how cheaply she tried to make me look dangerous, crazy, and how in a hurry she left in this letter the lines that would become the key. I reread the text, and my gaze stopped at the last line. It was printed in the same font, but in bold italics, as if someone specifically wanted it to remain in memory. Failure to comply with this requirement will lead to the intervention of law enforcement agencies and potential lawsuits for failure to fulfill duties towards the elderly. And here it is. That's the card she decided to play last. She was going to turn my silence, my reticence, my presence in the house into an accusation, to make me look like a dangerous old woman who poses a threat to a young, pregnant woman. It wasn't just humiliation. This was the end of the line she had been leading towards all along. I didn't say anything. I didn't go looking for her, didn't open the letter in front of her, didn't shout the truth in her face. I just folded this document carefully, put it in a new folder, where I kept all her gifts of the last 2 weeks, everything that she left me by mistake or with self-confidence, photos, copies, her speech, her threats, even printouts of her messages that I photographed that day. The evening when she didn't close the phone screen. Then I went to Mr. Holt's. Without recording. Without delay. Because now it wasn't just about my right to live in the house. It became a case of truth. About the destruction of the fictional reality that she had so lovingly built. When I sat down across from him and handed him the last folder, he did not immediately begin to read, first looked at me, and only then, flipping through the documents, reached the last page. He ran his eyes over the last line, chuckled, not from joy, but from uncertainty turning into determination, and said, "She's threatening you with accusations of neglecting the needs of the elderly, while you're being subjected to emotional abuse, systematic documented pressure, and financial gaslighting." And I told him everything, every detail that I had built up in my memory day after day, like a building assembled from the shadow of suspicion and the light of revelation, starting with the fake pregnancy dates, from the date printed on the ultrasound printout that did not match biological reality, from her words about 8 weeks, while Leon had been dead for 10 years. She told me about the name of the clinic shown in the picture, which I checked late at night, searching their website for. Deciphering codes, about the donor program she was supposedly enrolled in, but the dates just didn't add up, about the photograph thrown on the table like a weapon, and about her theatrical gestures, carefully measured, like steps through a minefield. I also told her about the phone conversations I had overheard at night, hiding in my room, where I shivered, leaning my ear against the wall, hanging on every word when, thinking she was alone, she planned to speed up the process and get rid of excess weight. There was not the slightest alarm in her voice, only dry, cold calculation. And I told her how I had led her to revelations, never raising my voice, asking questions that sounded like interest, but were bait, like a tool for catching the truth. Mr. Holt, after listening to everything to the end, nodded and said, "We have already moved beyond the civil conflict. This is now the territory of a fraud trial. And if she changed financial documents or used your identity in any capacity, we have the opportunity to initiate criminal charges." I asked, "What's the fastest way to prove it?" He replied, "We are requesting a subpoena for the provision of digital evidence, emails, message logs, medical data, bank transactions." I doubted, will the judge allow it at all? And then he slightly pushed my documents towards him, looked straight into my eyes and said, "If we provide documented falsifications, false eviction notices, inconsistencies in pregnancy dates and distortions of ownership data, we will not just get permission. We will get the leverage to take the initiative." I sat in his office, realizing that for the first time since Leon's death, I was no longer hiding, no longer afraid, no longer hiding behind politeness. I stopped surviving. I was going to fight. Fighting was my way to regain my name, my dignity, my home. On the way home, in the car, where the air was stretched like a string, I stopped by a 24-hour printing house, where I ordered 3 bound copies of everything I could collect, certificates in my name, refinancing documents, a copy of the ultrasound with a deliberately false date, her fake threatening notification, screenshots of correspondence, names, and the testimony of witnesses, those who heard her words about rewriting history, said over a glass of wine that evening. I wrote one word on the spine of the file, Emma. I put 1 copy in the safe in the bank branch, 1 in Mr. Holt's file folder, and the 3rd one I hid under the floorboard in my closet, in a secret place that only I knew about, in case she decided to search the house and I didn't have time to tell her where I kept the truth. When I got home, it was already late. She was standing in the kitchen, wearing headphones, talking on a video call, laughing, her voice ringing with fake enthusiasm, and I heard her say, "Yes, I'll get access to this place in 2 weeks at most. New opportunities are opening up." And I froze behind the wall, hearing these words. She wasn't just trying to take over the house for emotional comfort, not for memory, not because she couldn't let Leon go. She was going to sell it. Perhaps she was already negotiating, preparing documents. All this is a theater, a mask to gain legal control, and then a benefit. It was never about loss. I went into the kitchen so she could see me. She went to the refrigerator, took out a bottle of water, and unscrewed the lid. And I didn't look away until she turned off the screen, took off her headphones, and turned around and said, "Do you need anything?" "Just a warning," I said calmly, looking straight into her eyes. "If another envelope comes to my door, make sure it has the seal of the court on it. Anything less will go straight to my lawyer." She blinked, quickly, sharply, as if slapped, and her mouth barely twitched. "Are you threatening me now? You started a paper war, Emma." "I'm just making sure that my business is legal," I replied and left without waiting for her reaction, because I knew her eyes would tell everything. That night, after making myself some tea, I took out my old laptop and entered the username from Leon's mailbox, which he had once given me access to when he was looking for a job after he was fired. He asked me to help filter the responses, and I remembered his password, a line from his favorite song connected to his army number. He was still working. There wasn't much inside: old invoices, letters from recruiters, booking confirmations. But one folder was marked with a different color, red. It said, "Property." I opened it, and among the attached PDF documents, I found the one that changed everything. The file was called Draft Will, February 2024. I opened it, and my breath caught in my throat, because the signature at the bottom wasn't Leon's. I had known his handwriting since childhood. I knew the curve of every letter, every characteristic twist that he had kept in his name since his youth. This signature was different, too neat, too precise, as if it had been written from a sample. The notary's seal was partially cropped, copied, and pasted like a picture, sloppily, with a distortion of the scale. And most importantly, in the will, Emma was listed as the sole heiress, the sole beneficiary of the property, including the house. My name was nowhere to be found, although the date was a week before Leon's death. I printed out the document without touching the other files, my heart pounding like a hammer in my chest. I knew it was the same file she was trying to hide in the backup plan folder. And the metadata was shamelessly obvious, created on a computer registered under the name Emma K. And I sent the file directly to Mr. Holt and wrote just 2 lines: "She forged his will. Then it's up to you." And, surprisingly, I didn't even flinch when I clicked send, because at that moment there was no room for fear, doubt, or even anger, only clarity, pure and icy, like the wind in the mountains, when you see in front of you the entire route to the top. The next morning, before I had even finished buttering the toast, the phone rang. Mr. Holt's voice was calm, but there was no longer the same tension in his intonation, only the firmness of a man who knows that the next piece on the board is his. "We will apply today," he said, and there was something final in those words, something that turned the whole feeling of struggle inside me over. From that second on, I no longer stood on the defensive, did not hide, did not bend under the onslaught of her lies and manipulations. We were launching an offensive. Because now we had not just a suspicion, not just a set of disturbing coincidences, but digital proof, genuine, verifiable, linked to a device, confirmed by metadata, a file created on her computer with a fictitious will and a forged signature. It was proof of intent, proof of attempted deception, fraud, forgery of legal documents, and now it was a case, not an assumption. Mr. Holt, slowly but with impeccable consistency, laid out the steps of the plan according to which we will act, filing a motion to freeze any attempts to transfer or alienate ownership of the house, a subsequent request for judicial review of the current will, registration of a fraud claim in the inheritance court, registration of a protective notice on the property, to exclude the possibility of its sale, mortgage, or any other refinancing. He finished with a short sentence: "You will not need to hand over the documents. The court will do it." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me, because for the first time in a long time, someone else stood next to me, not out of politeness, not out of sympathy, but to protect me, to fight for me the way I had been fighting for myself all this time. And I knew I wouldn't be alone anymore. By noon of the same day, as if something in her had caught the shift, felt the movement of the ground under her feet, Emma had changed. She suddenly became strangely friendly, offered to cook dinner, diligently asked if I would like to go with her to pick out children's clothes, spoke softly, with fake concern, which would be enough for a television drama. When I refused, she tilted her head to the side, like a puppy studying a stranger, and asked, "Is everything okay?" I just smiled, but not like before, not stiffly, not hiding. "We'll see," I replied, and her smile faded for a second. Later, when she had gone somewhere, the bailiff called me. The voice was neutral, almost tired. "We will deliver the package of documents this evening. Don't interfere." I replied calmly, "Believe me, I wasn't going to." And then she sat on the sofa by the window, opening the blinds, letting the light flood the room, and just waited, like a person who knows that justice is on its way. Around 5 o'clock in the evening, her black SUV turned into the house. 2 bags in her hands, a smile on her lips, the gait of a woman who has everything under control. But as soon as she stepped onto the porch steps, a man in a gray jacket with a leather briefcase and a folder in his hand detached himself from a car parked at the curb. He went up to her, pronounced her full name, clearly, loudly, officially. She froze, looked at him, puzzled, and said uncertainly, "Yes?" "You are being served with a notice of inheritance fraud and a ban on property," he said, handing over a thick envelope. She took it, confused, and I saw her lips part in an attempt to ask a question, but her voice wouldn't come out. She breathed out, clutching the bag to her chest with trembling fingers. "You need to read this," he replied and left without saying another word. I watched her from the living room window. She was standing in the middle of the porch, like a woman who had been sentenced. She did not immediately enter the house. For a long moment, I just stared at the envelope, at the seal, at the letters. And then her eyes lifted and met mine. I didn't look away. She didn't move. I just sat there until she walked into the house with quick steps, dropped her bags at the door, went into the dining room and threw the envelope on the dining table. I could hear her opening it, unfolding the pages, and I heard her say on the 3rd page, "No. No. No." And then, louder, with an anguish, "She's lying. It's all a lie." She turned to me, her face contorted with anger, and shouted, "What did you tell them?" I stood up, slowly, calmly, and said, "I didn't say anything." The documents spoke. She threw the envelope on the floor, turned around, and rushed into the kitchen, muttering, "I'll fix this. That's not going to happen. It can't be." But I didn't answer anymore. Because she wasn't talking to me anymore. She was talking to a world that for the first time denied her the right to dictate her truth. She didn't leave her room that night. I didn't have dinner. She didn't try to speak. And the next morning, I heard her pacing the front yard, barefoot, in a bathrobe, with a phone, with a desperate intonation in which fear and rage were intertwined into one. "Just find me a lawyer who knows how to bury such cases," she hissed. "I don't care how much it costs. She's just an old woman." And I went out onto the porch, folded my arms on my chest, and stood so that she could see me. And she didn't say a word. I didn't have to say anything else. I knew I'd heard enough. And she knew that I had heard everything. And 2 days later, as if the whole world had accelerated its pace to catch up with the truth, which had remained in the shadows for so long, a court date was set, a preliminary hearing designed to determine the authenticity of the will, its legality, and my rights as a co-owner. After all these weeks, when every morning began with waiting for a blow, and every evening it ended with a wordless struggle for calm. We arrived at the courthouse early, and I was standing in the hallway with Mr. Holt, holding the documents, which had become almost a body to me during that time. They were so tightly pressed to my heart. And then she came, in a cream blazer, immaculately coiffed, wearing earrings that I'd once seen on her ears during Leon's wake, and with an ultrasound photo carefully enclosed in a plastic cover, like stage props prepared for a play in which she wanted to play the victim. Her lawyer began his speech almost in a whisper, with carefully chosen words, with pauses between sentences that suggested rehearsed grief. He spoke about pain, loss, widowhood, the uncertainty of pregnancy at such a difficult time, and the fact that his client was forced to protect herself and the child from the unstable behavior of an elderly woman, experiencing a severe psycho-emotional crisis. He wasn't looking at me, he was playing in front of the referee, in front of the walls, in front of his fee. But Holt did not allow this performance to develop. He spoke briefly, precisely, coldly, and there was no accusatory rage in his voice, but the confidence of a surgeon pointing out an anomaly in the image. He presented a comparison of Leon's original signature and the one on the will. He showed metadata proving that the document was created on Emma's laptop, that it was edited from her personal account, and provided the refinancing records, which showed that only Leon and I remained owners of the property, while Emma's name did not even appear in any of the official documents signed during her lifetime. And then he laid out the key thing, a contract in my name, registered with the real estate authorities, genuine, untouched, kept by me and the bank, and never challenged until that day. And when Holt said, "Your Honor, my client has been a co-owner of this property since the very first day of its acquisition," the judge, an elderly man with tired but attentive eyes, leaned forward, flipped through the documents and said, without raising his voice, "Lawyer, this is very clear." I saw how Emma sagged at that moment. It was as if the whole pose she had built as a defense had collapsed. Her shoulders slumped, her fingers clenched into fists, her mouth twitched, and for a second it seemed that she was about to scream, but her voice did not come out. And then the judge continued. There was no sympathy or aggression in his voice, just the law. Temporary restrictions on property rights have been lifted. Mrs. Clara retains the legal right to joint ownership. All eviction lawsuits have been declared invalid. As for the will, he paused, an investigation will be launched into it for fraud and forgery. Her lawyer whispered something hurriedly, but I saw her look at him as if he had betrayed her, as if it was his fault that the world no longer played by her rules. And I stood there, not triumphant, not rejoicing, not taking revenge. I just stood there, knowing that the truth had finally been spoken out loud, not my truth, but the real one. When we left the courtroom, Holt said, looking ahead without turning around, "Now we'll wait and see if she gives up quietly or starts packing her bags." I nodded without saying a word. And in the car, while we were driving back, I checked the mail on my phone and saw an email from the judicial system, recognition of ownership rights. The status is confirmed. I smiled, not out of malice, not out of revenge, but out of that special relief that comes when the truth stops being vulnerable. The next morning, the house was unnaturally quiet, not peaceful, but the way it is in complete silence before a thunderstorm, when the air itself becomes dense, like a cloth. I went into the kitchen and saw Emma. She was already there, dressed all in black, as if she was going to another funeral, and sitting at the table with a cup of coffee that she hadn't drunk. There was a notebook in front of her, filled with neat lines, names, numbers, notes. She didn't look up at me, just said softly, "Do you think you've won?" I didn't answer right away. I went to the kettle and poured myself a cup of coffee, slowly, as if every movement was a ritual. I let her fill the silence with her own thoughts. And she continued, "Do you think if the judge believes your little story, it's over?" Then I turned to her and said calmly, without tension, "It wasn't a story, Emma. It was the law." Those words hit her harder than if I'd screamed. She stood up so abruptly that the chair creaked on the tile, her fingers pressed against the edges of the table. "You can't steal everything from me. Stop it," she shouted. And I looked into her eyes, straight and firm, and replied, "You tried to erase me from the house I helped build, from the life I've been in since the beginning. You tried to cut me out with a fake will and a non-existent pregnancy." She froze. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. And then, as always, she tried to change the subject, to walk away. I was grieving. I didn't know what to do. But I didn't let her finish. "Not anymore," I said. "The performance is over. Everyone knows that. And you know it. Pack your things. I show you more respect than you've ever shown me. I'm not calling the police yet." She opened her mouth again, then snapped it shut, grabbed her phone and, without saying a word, ran out of the house. I sat down at the kitchen table, picked up a cup of coffee, took a sip, and for the first time in weeks, it didn't taste alarming. It was just coffee. It's just morning. I'm just at home. And for the next few hours, the house remained silent. Not deaf, not wary. And in that silence that comes after a storm, when the air becomes clear again, and you take your first breath after a long stay underwater. And I went to Leon's old room, the one he had once chosen himself, saying that its window provided the best morning light, the one in which every detail still breathed his presence, although they had already tried to erase it with the hands of a stranger, and closed the door behind me, feeling like her creak, muffled and recognizable, resonated somewhere inside me. I sat on the edge of the bed, on a neatly stretched blanket, and let my eyes slide over the bookshelf, empty now, without his old philosophy volumes, which he reread every September, on the walls, where there were still faded outlines of symbols and patterns he had drawn, fantasies that he had once invented in teenage delight. And then, almost unconsciously, I whispered into the air, "We're all right now, baby. I promise." These words were not an oath or consolation. It was a confirmation, almost a legal one, that justice had returned to our home. I reached over to his desk, opened the top drawer, which I hadn't touched since the funeral, ever since the days when any touching of his belongings seemed blasphemous. There wasn't much inside: a couple of scattered stationery items, a notebook, a small box with stationery buttons, and, in the corner, a folded piece of paper. I recognized his handwriting even before I unfolded it, familiar, slightly angular, with his favorite long features and tilt to the right. He did not sign the letter, but the date in the corner, 3 weeks before his death, and each line, full of pain, repentance, and unrequited love, left no doubt. It began simply, "If anything happens to me, I need you to know that I'm sorry." And I felt my chest constrict, not from grief, but from the amazing realization that he knew. He felt the end approaching, or perhaps he just felt that something was collapsing and didn't want to leave without leaving a trace. He wrote about guilt, how he allowed Emma to isolate him from friends and family, how he knew she was manipulating him, and how he tried to fix it, but he didn't know how. He wrote that he was afraid he couldn't share with me anymore because she demanded that he choose a side. And at the bottom, like a final chord, it was written, "Don't let her take everything. This house has always been ours, not hers. Do what you have to do, Mom." My hands trembled, but not from pain, from the clarity, from the power of this last gesture, from the fact that even after death he was trying to convey to me what he had not managed in life. I carefully scanned the email into my phone, put the file in a secure folder, printed out a copy, and hid the original in a drawer next to the documents, not because I wanted to use it, but because it was mine. Ours. In the evening, when the sun slid across the kitchen ceiling, turning the walls a copper shade, Emma returned. Her face was contorted with rage, there was no grace or control in her gait, and as soon as she entered, she said, "You're going to regret this. I'm going to the press. I'll tell everyone how you bullied the grieving widow." I looked up from the book I was reading and answered flatly, "Then I'll show them the ultrasound dates, the metadata of the will, and the letter that Leon left me." Her face was as white as marble, her breathing was labored, and her eyes widened like those of a person who has suddenly seen a ghost. "You're bluffing," she whispered. I didn't answer, just said, "Try me." She turned around, and the door slammed shut behind her with such force that the old photo frame fell off the wall in the hallway, sliding across the floor with a crunch. I didn't flinch. I picked it up, put it back in, and went to cook dinner, just like any other night, because now my every act was an act of restoring order. While the pasta was cooking, I wrote to Holt, "I found a personal letter that reinforces the motive. I'll forward it." The answer came immediately, "Send it. It's bulletproof." That night, for the first time in months, I went to bed with the window open, without a wedge under the door, without a spare key under the pillow, allowing cool air to enter the room, allowing silence to remain inside, not as an expectation, but as a new order. And in the morning, before dawn, I heard sounds, knocking, rustling, sliding on the floor. Boxes. Package. And when I went out into the hallway, the space near her room was filled with cardboard boxes, some sealed in a hurry, others marked with a marker, bathroom, clothes, kitchen, and this was the very sign of defeat, when it no longer matters where to put it, just to leave faster. I didn't say anything. I didn't ask if she was really leaving. I knew she had lost. And not because I won, but because she no longer had any cards, just a bluff, and it fell apart under the weight of court documents and her own vanity. When she came into the kitchen, for the first time in 2 days, she didn't look at me right away, just opened a drawer, looked for something that wasn't there and couldn't be, as if hoping to find one last opportunity to turn everything around. Then, still glancing at me, she said, "I'll be gone by Friday." I nodded, not triumphantly, not with a sarcastic smile, just nodded, like a person who discusses the details of a move, not the end of a month-long siege. You can get your house back, she added with that strange intonation that sounded hurt, but also a drop of relief. He was never yours to give, I replied. And that, I saw, pierced her more than any words in court. She froze, as if she was going to object, but couldn't find a phrase that wouldn't get stuck in her throat. And I walked past, went to the stove, put the kettle on, not for effect, but because I really wanted tea, and by that time I knew that the most powerful weapon was not revenge or rage, but a simple, stubborn continuation of a life in which she no longer had a place. And later that day, 2 people actually came to her, loud, annoyingly self-confident, with voices that didn't know what it meant to speak in a whisper, and walking down a hallway cluttered with boxes that smelled of film and dust, they started carrying things into the car, discussing me as if I didn't exist in the car. The house they were crossing. Their words flew past the doors, past the walls, but I heard them clearly. She's crazy, and how did you even live here with her? And I didn't need to engage in dialogue, because these were not questions, but excuses that they threw into the air to convince themselves that they are doing something right. I stayed in my room, holding a book in my hands that I hadn't read, and let those words slide by like rain on glass, without soaking in, without leaving a trace. The next morning, when everything seemed to have become irreversible and the approach of her departure was as inevitable as the change of the season, she took another, most pathetic and broken move. She called Kyle, Leon's old friend, the one who came to the wake and hugged me so tightly that I felt how loneliness disappears for a second. She left him a voice message in which, with anguish, but still with the same false intonation, she said that I had fabricated the whole case, that Leon had never wanted me to stay in the house, that I had manipulated, squeezed her out, using tactics of elder abuse to take everything for myself. What she didn't know, or perhaps couldn't have foreseen, for all her coolness, was that Kyle had already talked to me a long time ago, seen all the documents, read Leon's letter, and knew who was telling the truth here. His message came to me almost immediately after hers, just one line. She's desperate. I didn't answer. Not because I had nothing to say, but because it didn't matter anymore. By Thursday, everything was almost finished. Her car, piled high with boxes, cloth bags, and the remnants of the life she'd been trying to imagine, was parked in the driveway. Her face was pale, almost sickly, and the makeup that had once been her shield had spread under her eyes, as proof that the play had come to an end and she could no longer hold the scenery. She stood at the door with the last bag in her hand, not knowing exactly how to end it, with drama, goodbye, or threat. There was a tremor in her voice as she said, "You don't have to do this." I stood quietly, not allowing myself a gesture or a pause. "You too," I replied. And she took a half step back, as if she hadn't expected to hear such a simple, mirror-like truth, as if she was waiting for an outburst of anger, tears, a scream, anything that would give her a chance to make me look like a monster again. But all she got was a woman who was no longer fighting because everything had already been won. She was standing on a porch that had never been hers, with a future that now crumbled in her hands like ashes. I opened the door and said in a flat voice, "You have until midnight." She held her gaze, and then, for the first time in all this time, she asked a question, not as an accusation, but as a confession, almost childishly. "Where should I go?" "Anywhere but this place," I replied, looking her straight in the eye. I closed the door not with a bang, not with anger, but with a finality that required no scenes. I could hear her staying on the porch, silent, perhaps for the first time feeling an emptiness not filled with voices or plans. She stood there for almost a minute, long, slow, and only then, without looking back, went to the car, slammed the trunk and drove away. I didn't cry. I didn't feel relieved or triumphant. I just felt tired, the kind that comes not from pain, but from the weight of something that has finally lifted off my shoulders. And when the sun disappeared behind the trees, I turned off the porch light, locked the door, and allowed myself, for the first time in a long time, to just sit in silence, without tension in my shoulders, without glancing over my shoulder, without fear of hearing her footsteps outside the door. The house was mine again. Not just legally, not just physically. He became quiet, genuine, cleansed of the distorted reality she was trying to turn him into. I thought that this was the end, that the story was over, until I walked into the living room and saw the flash drive. Small, nameless, and silvery, it lay on the coffee table as a reminder, like the last bone thrown into the center of the circle. Emma never left anything for nothing. If something was in a visible place, it meant that she wanted it to be found. I stared at the flash drive for a long time. I didn't touch her. I didn't touch her. I knew it wasn't an accident. She had been planning her actions too long and carefully to allow herself to forget something containing potential information, compromising material, or a message. I was sitting in front of her, as if in front of a booby-trapped point. I thought about throwing it away, leaving it, pretending it didn't exist. But after everything I'd been through, I knew that if I left that thread broken, it would still follow me. And I won't let her stay in my life, even as a question. So I plugged the flash drive into Leon's old laptop, the one that stood in the corner of his home office under neatly stacked dust, like a silent timekeeper that Emma never looked at without a grimace. According to her, it smelled of bitterness, memories, and reminded too much of the person she wanted to use, but I didn't understand. The screen lit up slowly, as if coming to life from a long sleep, and I saw a single folder, without a password, without protection, just a bold inscription "Open Me," and inside there was only one file. Video. I clicked twice, and a moment later the screen filled with grainy images, the camera wobbled, and then, when the autofocus calmed down, a shot appeared that momentarily paralyzed me. Emma, sitting in the same chair in which I checked my emails in the morning, in the same room where Leon read aloud to me when he was a small one, where we would choose the paint for the walls together, as if it had never been hers. She was looking directly at the camera, and the tone of her voice was neither angry nor pained, but quiet, self-satisfied, as if she was still playing chess and was sure that her last piece was still on the board. "If you're watching this," she said, bowing her head slightly, "then either I'm gone or you think you've won." She waited for a pause, and then continued, still evenly, "I did what I had to do, and maybe I crossed the line, but you should never have stayed here forever, Clara. You were a temporary place, a guest who abused her hospitality." I didn't move, just clenched my jaw, feeling my heart begin to beat faster, but not from fear, from the old pain, the one when someone dares to rewrite your life without living a single day in your skin. She leaned closer, and her eyes became darker, as if she was about to tell something intimate. "The last thing, Leon wanted to ask you to leave before his death. He just didn't have the courage to say it." I paused the video. The air became muffled. These words were calculated not to convey the truth, but to corrode my confidence. She knew how to hit. Even on the record, even through the camera lens, she was still trying to steer. But I pressed play again and watched her continue, as if she needed to finish saying, "I told him we could build something if we had the space. If only he could finally let go of the past. But he was weak. He couldn't cut the umbilical cord. So I had to do it for him." And she smiled. Subtly, bitterly, victoriously. It's as if breaking the bonds between mother and son is an act of love, not despair. She ended with words that made the room feel colder. "You can keep the house, Clara, but you'll never forget it." The screen went dark. Silence filled the room. I wasn't angry. She didn't cry. She wasn't shaking. I just sat and stared at the black rectangle of the screen, knowing that this was her final move. Not a legal one, not a strategic one, but an emotional one. The last arrow. One last attempt to say the last word. But she didn't know what I knew, that I already had Leon's handwritten letter, with every crooked line, with every apology, with every word of truth that would survive all her performances. I got up, opened the drawer, took out the letter, unfolded it, and, holding it in my hands, stared at the still frame of her face, froze before deleting the video, as before saying goodbye. I didn't feel angry. I felt peaceful. Because it was no longer a struggle. It was the end. I pulled out the flash drive, threw it in the trash, and deleted the file from my laptop, not because I was afraid someone would see it, but because I no longer needed reminders. I wasn't going to keep her message like poison in a vial. The war is over. The house was filled with what it had once been before her silence, the smell of coffee, the sound of footsteps on the floor that didn't rattle with alarm. I put my books back on the shelves, unpacked the last things from the boxes, which she marked with a marker as junk, put Leon's photo back on the shelf in the hallway, like a guardian, lit a candle in the kitchen, the one that smelled of vanilla, and sat down at the table not like a widow, not like an abandoned mother, not like defeated, but like a man who's got his own name back. I drank tea, listening to how there was not a single superfluous sound in the house. No breathing in the hallway, no footsteps at the door, no tension lurking around the corner. Just me. Only the walls that knew my pain and my victory. I looked out the window at the porch, where her suitcases had been until recently, her loud footsteps, her confidence that everything could be snatched from life, and whispered, "My house. My rules." And she smiled. Not with a big smile, not with a gleam of triumph, but quietly, barely noticeably. Because for the first time since the funeral, I could breathe in a space that belonged to me completely. Not because I won. It's because I never let her take it away. Write a comment on what you think about this story and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. See you soon.